My name is Lily Harris. I'm 39 Director of Client Services at Cole & Co., or I was until yesterday. 11 years building this company gone with 2 words from Ryan Cole. The CEO's son, you're fired. Now I'm sitting here jobless, humiliated, and holding the one contract that could destroy him. I spent 11 years building that company, late nights, broken holidays, sacrificing pieces of myself to keep it thriving. Then one morning, Ryan, the founder's golden boy, fired me over lukewarm coffee with no more emotion than swatting a fly. He didn't know he'd just cut the only person who could save his billion-dollar deal. As calls poured in, desperation dripping from his polite commands, I realized power shifts in silence. I walked back in not as his employee, but as the woman holding his fate in her steady, unshaken hands. And I was done letting men like him decide what I was worth. I still remember the moment like it's branded onto my bones. It was a Thursday morning, quiet gray, nothing special about it. I was standing by the office coffee machine, swirling a dash of oat milk into my morning brew, half listening to the gurgle of dark roast dripping into my cup. For a second, I thought about the meeting I had later that afternoon, the final review for the Kingswell deal I'd been working on for half a year. My phone buzzed on the counter with another email from legal flagged urgent. I ignored it. I just wanted 1 minute of peace before the chaos began. Then the door swung open. Ryan walked in. He didn't greet me, didn't nod, didn't even pretend to acknowledge me as a living person in the room. His eyes skimmed over me like I was nothing more than a flickering fluorescent bulb or a half-dead plant someone forgot to water. Ryan Cole, son of the Mr. Cole, newly minted CEO fresh out of Harvard Business School, with all the arrogance of someone who thought success came with their surname. He moved like he owned the air around him, like every square inch of carpet was laid down for his shoes, alone. He paused by the fridge, grabbed a bottle of spring water, twisted it open with a loud pop, then turned his gaze on me, sharp, cold, evaluative. "Lily," he said, his voice slicing through the humming coffee machine. "I need to see you in my office. A beat, then now." It wasn't a request. It wasn't even an order. It was an announcement, a foregone conclusion, like he'd already decided the conversation before I even walked in. I felt a flicker of annoyance tighten in my chest, but I swallowed it down, nodding silently as I set my coffee aside. 11 years here had taught me a few things. Never show fear. Never show anger, and never let them see how much you care. Because that's how they win, they feed off the cracks. As I followed him down the hall, my shoes clicking against the marble floors, I noticed how people glanced up from their screens, eyes darting back down immediately as if contact would implicate them in whatever was about to happen. Ryan didn't speak. He didn't even hold the door open. When we reached his office, it almost slammed in my face before I caught it with my fingertips. Inside, the air was colder. The blinds were half-drawn streaks of harsh morning light, cutting across the sleek black table and his curated set of family photos. Him at some beach in Capri, him on stage at his graduation, him shaking hands with board members twice his age. Not a single candid smile in any of them. Just Ryan perfectly posed in every frame, as if happiness was a performance he rehearsed daily. He didn't sit, just stood behind his desk, fingers drumming against the glossy surface. "You're fired," he said flatly. No preamble, no context. Just 2 words thrown at me like a paperweight, hurled across the room. I blinked. For a moment, my mind refused to process it. Fired. Was this a joke? Some twisted HR exercise to see how I'd react under pressure? "Excuse me," I managed, my voice sounding calm, almost amused, despite the sudden pounding in my ears. "You heard me?" He flipped through a stack of papers without looking at me, his eyes scanning contracts. as if deciding what to have for lunch. "Pack up your things and leave. Effective immediately." He didn't explain. He didn't cite performance or restructuring or budget cuts. Just lazy people, that's what he called me later in passing, when I asked for clarification. "We don't need lazy people like you dragging this place down." Lazy. The word echoed in my skull, absurd and hollow. 11 years. I had built the client services department from scratch. I'd negotiated over 100 contracts, pulled all-nighters to rescue deals that could have bankrupted us, mentored half the people sitting outside his glass walls right now. Lazy wasn't just an insult. It was a complete erasure of everything I had given this place. But as I stood there clutching the strap of my bag, the fury that should have risen never came. Instead, a strange calmness settled over me, like my body knew, something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. I smiled, a small, deliberate, polite smile. The kind you give to someone who just stepped on your foot and blamed you for it. "Understood," I said softly. "Have a nice day, Ryan." And with that, I turned and walked out. My legs felt like marble pillars holding up a temple about to crumble. As I passed my team's desks, I could feel eyes following me, whispers blooming behind screens. Some of them started to stand faces etched with concern and confusion, ready to ask what was wrong. But I gave a subtle shake of my head. "Don't make this harder." At my desk, I moved in silence. Laptop, charger. The ceramic mug with cherry blossoms my daughter had painted for me in 3rd grade. A framed quote I'd kept by my monitor. "Never let small minds convince you that your dreams are too big." I placed each item carefully into my canvas. Tote zipped it up and stood one last time to look at the place I had given a third of my life to. Then, with my head held high and my chest hollow, I walked out the glass doors into the cool June morning, leaving behind everything and everyone who thought they could define my worth with 2 careless words. The morning air hit my face like a slap as I stepped outside. Cold, sharp, real. I stood there on the sidewalk for a moment, tote bag heavy against my shoulder, watching people stream past me, interns in hurried strides, directors talking into earpieces, janitors wheeling yellow mop buckets down the marble halls. The city moved on, oblivious to the small apocalypse that had just detonated in my chest. Lazy. The word throbbed inside me, ugly and loud. My heart pounded so hard it hurt like my ribs were trying to cage a wild animal, desperate to escape. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march back into his glass fortress, slam my badge on his desk and list out every damn contract I'd saved from collapsing, every client I'd cajoled back from the brink, every midnight email I'd drafted while my daughter slept alone in her room upstairs. But I didn't scream. I didn't go back. Instead, I walked, block after block, my feet moving on autopilot, weaving through crowds without seeing faces, until I found myself standing at the edge of the river. The breeze rippled across the water, carrying with it the smell of damp concrete and flowering trees. I dropped my bag onto a bench and sat down, fingers trembling, as I fished out my phone. I opened my inbox out of habit. 97 unread messages, 1 from legal, 3 from finance, 12 from my team, and none of it mattered anymore. For the first time in 11 years, I had nothing to respond to. A bitter laugh bubbled up in my throat, surprising me. How many times had I wished for a break? How many holidays had I worked through, promising myself next year will be different? How many dinners had I missed? How many ballet recitals had I only seen through a shaky phone video because work needed me just 1 more hour? And now they didn't need me at all. I thought about calling my sister, about driving straight to my daughter's school, signing her out early, and taking her for ice cream in the middle of the day just because I could. But I didn't move. I sat there staring at the gentle ripples in the river, wondering why the anger wouldn't come. Because beneath the shock, beneath the humiliation, there was something else unfurling inside me. Curiosity. Why fire me now? Why use a flimsy insult instead of a fabricated restructure or budget cut like every other corporate decapitation I'd seen in my career? Why, days before we were set to finalize Kingswell, the biggest deal we'd landed in 5 years, a deal I had spent 6 months nurturing like a fragile orchid no one else knew how to water. My mind spun back to Monday's final review call. The client sounded confident. They trusted me. They had asked for my direct presence in Friday's signing meeting. The dotted lines were ready pending final legal clearance, which Ryan hadn't even attended. He'd brushed it off as non-essential operational details. I let out a shaky breath, brushing hair from my face, as the wind picked up cool against the hot flush rising in my neck. He doesn't even know I realized. He hadn't read the file. He hadn't read the contract. He didn't understand that under Clause 17.2, the one Mr. Cole himself had insisted upon, after the Steel Ridge disaster, I was the sole authorized negotiator for Kingswell. No one else could finalize the deal. Legally, ethically, practically. Without me, the entire thing would collapse like a house built on rotting stilts. I blinked at the river, the early sun glinting off the ripples in a way that almost hurt my eyes. That was when it hit me. This wasn't an ending. This wasn't even a failure. This was leverage. Pure, unfiltered leverage handed to me by the arrogant hand that had tried to erase me. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, heart hammering in quiet anticipation. Then it buzzed again. And again. The calls started stacking up like dominoes ready to fall. But I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I leaned back on the bench, letting the breeze wash over me. For the first time in years, I felt an electric clarity sharpen in my chest. The realization that for all the power men like Ryan thought they held, sometimes it only took one overlooked name in a contract to topple their kingdom. And today, that overlooked name was mine. I sat on that bench by the river for what felt like hours, though. My watch told me it was only 43 minutes. Memories came in quiet, uninvited waves. 11 years, 11 birthdays I celebrated with leftover sheet cake in the break room because I was too busy to take the day off. 11 Christmases where I stayed late to finalize year-end budgets, sneaking out of holiday parties early with half-hearted excuses. 11 years of sacrifices measured not in days but in moments, missed dinners, unanswered calls, unread bedtime stories. I thought about my daughter. I thought about the time she stood in the kitchen at midnight, half asleep in her pink unicorn pajamas, watching me hunched over my laptop with cold pasta on the counter beside me. She didn't say anything, just padded over, wrapped her small arms around my waist and whispered, "Don't work too hard, Mommy." I thought about the time I signed my divorce papers in my car during lunch break, wiping mascara streaks off my cheeks with a Starbucks napkin before walking back into the office like nothing had happened. Ryan hadn't been there yet, but the company had. They'd been there through every collapse and every rebuild, silent witnesses to a life spent in service of their bottom line. And now I realized with a bitter laugh, they'd let me go like I was nothing more than expired toner in the copy room. The breeze rustled through the willow trees lining the riverbank. People jogged past, earbuds in lungs burning with endorphins and early morning optimism. I wondered if any of them had ever felt this hollow, this quiet sense of being both invisible and exposed all at once. Why? That single question echoed louder than all the others. Why fire me now, days before Kingswell's final signing? Why risk destabilizing a deal that would inject millions into a struggling quarter? Why do it so abruptly, with no warning, No HR script, no carefully curated severance package with an NDA slipped discreetly underneath. Because Ryan was many things arrogant, entitled, dismissive, but he wasn't stupid. Not completely. Firing me right before Kingswell felt reckless, even for him. Unless he didn't know. Unless he didn't care to know. I thought back to the first day he walked in as CEO. Dark tailored suit, slick hair handshake firm to the point of painful. His eyes had scanned the open office floor, pausing on each team leader like he was flipping through a catalog of assets. When he got to me, his gaze didn't linger. Not out of respect, out of disinterest. I was to him a middle manager with no strategic value. An operator, not a thinker. Someone easy to replace. I remembered the first time I presented the Kingswell strategy to the executive committee. Ryan hadn't even looked up from his phone as I outlined the 18-month phased rollout and Arabic market adaptation strategy. He'd only nodded absently at the end and muttered, "Yeah, whatever legal needs to sign off." He didn't read the contracts. He didn't read my contract. That realization sent a ripple through me, one that felt dangerously close to exhilaration. Under Clause 72, I was the sole authorized negotiator for Kingswell. That clause had been Mr. Cole's condition after the Steel Ridge disaster 4 years ago, when a junior exec botched a critical signing, costing the company $12 million and nearly triggering a lawsuit. Mr. Cole swore, never again. From then on, any account over $5 million required a designated negotiator with sole authority, and I was Kingswell's. I clenched my hands in my lap, knuckles whitening. He didn't know. He really didn't know. For a flicker of a moment, my mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe HR filed the wrong termination paperwork. Maybe he thought he was cutting costs. But the memory of his flat eyes as he said, "Lazy people like you," burned away any generosity I had left to give. No, this was personal. He wanted me gone. But in his rush to exert power, he missed the fine print, the clause that now tied this deal and this company's immediate future directly to me. I exhaled shakily, staring out across the rippling gray water. My chest felt hollow, scraped clean, but underneath the emptiness there was something new, beginning to take shape. Not anger, not grief, not yet. Control. For the first time in years, I felt it bloom inside me, quiet and electric. Ryan thought he'd ended my story today. What he didn't know was that I had become the final chapter he couldn't write without. My phone buzzed again, breaking the silence. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it buzzed again. Then again. The quiet desperation behind each ring felt almost satisfying. I slipped the phone into my pocket, stood up, and slung my tote over my shoulder. The morning sun was higher now, catching the edges of the buildings in brilliant gold. I tilted my head back, letting the warmth wash over my face for a moment, grounding myself in its steadiness. They wanted to erase me. Instead, they had given me the one thing I hadn't felt in years: leverage. And I wasn't about to waste it. I was halfway back to my apartment when my phone buzzed again, vibrating insistently against my thigh. This time I glanced down out of reflex, expecting another unknown number, another panicked call from reception, or legal, or Ryan himself trying to claw back control. But the name that flashed across the screen made me freeze mid-step. Mr. Cole. The real Mr. Cole. My pulse jumped in my throat so hard it almost hurt. I hadn't heard his voice in months. Ever since he'd quietly stepped back to let his son take the reins, he'd become almost mythic, a presence felt in board memos and legal clauses, not in phone calls to mid-level directors like me. My thumb hovered over decline. Part of me didn't want to hear whatever came next, didn't want to be dragged back into loyalty or guilt or obligation, didn't want to hear apologies on behalf of his son when the damage had already been done. But curiosity, as always, won. I slid my thumb across accept and pressed the phone to my ear, ignoring the rush of traffic and city noise around me. Lily, his voice rumbled low and gravelly, laced with exhaustion, and something else I couldn't quite place, fear maybe. "It's Mr. Cole." I swallowed, forcing my voice to stay even. "Good morning. I just walked into the office." He continued each word clipped and deliberate, like he was fighting to stay calm. "And I hear you packed up and left. What happened? I stopped walking, completely standing against a brick storefront, watching a man across the street load boxes into a delivery van." "Your son fired me," I said simply. Silence. The kind of silence that feels like a vacuum sucking the air out of everything, when his voice was low, dangerous. "Yesterday," I replied. "He called me lazy, said I wasn't needed anymore." Another pause, then a sharp inhale like he was biting back a string of curses. "Lazy," he repeated almost to himself. The word sounded absurd in his mouth the way it had in mine. Then his voice shifted, regaining its steel. "Lily, did he read your contract?" I frowned. "What do you mean, Kingswell?" He snapped. "He's supposed to finalize that deal today, isn't he?" I felt the corners of my lips twitch in a humorless smile. "Yes. We were scheduled to meet them at 11. Jesus Christ. Papers rustled loudly through the phone, then a heavy thud, like he'd slammed something onto his massive oak desk. "Lily, your contract has a clause," he said, voice tight with urgency. "One I insisted on after Steel Ridge. You're not just the account manager, you're the only authorized negotiator for the Kingswell deal." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. "He can't close the deal without you," Mr. Cole continued. "Not legally, not ethically, not even practically. That contract will fall apart unless you're in that room." A slow burning realization settled in my chest, hot and cold all at once. He didn't know. Ryan had no idea what he'd done. He thought he was cutting out dead weight cleaning house, making a show of power to a staff that never respected him. But in doing so, he'd severed the artery keeping the company alive this quarter. And that was something no shiny MBA could teach him to fix. I opened my eyes again, staring blankly at a pigeon pecking stale crumbs near my feet. "That question haunted me all night," I whispered. "Why he did it? Why now? Why like that?" "He didn't read your contract," Mr. Cole said, almost in disbelief. He didn't even bother. There was a beat of silence between us, filled only by the distant wail of an ambulance weaving through morning traffic. Then he spoke again, his voice lower, darker. "He pulled the trigger far too quickly, Lily. And now the gun is pointed at himself." I said nothing. There was nothing to say. The betrayal still hurt. It burned in the hollow of my chest like acid. But beneath the hurt, a new feeling coiled tight and calm in my belly. Control. I could hear his breathing on the line, shallow and ragged with restrained fury. Then, without another word, he hung up. The abrupt silence felt final, like the slam of a gavel in a courtroom. I lowered the phone from my ear, the city coming back into focus around me. Honking cars, crossing signals, beeping a woman scolding her toddler for dropping ice cream on the pavement. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and let out a quiet, bitter laugh that startled a passing cyclist. He shot me a strange look before pedaling away, but I barely noticed. For 11 years, I had poured my life into that place. I had swallowed pride, buried anger, hidden exhaustion, and smiled through every insult. I thought I did it for stability, for safety, for loyalty. But today I realized something important. Stability is an illusion. Safety is leverage disguised as kindness. And loyalty only matters if it goes both ways. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders against the city breeze, and started walking home. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I walked home in silence, letting the city noise wash over me like static. Horns blared. Somewhere a street saxophonist played a bluesy riff that vibrated through my chest, but inside everything was quiet. At my apartment, I dropped my bag by the door, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the couch staring at the cold coffee I'd left behind that morning. I took a sip anyway, grimacing at its bitter chill. It grounded me, reminded me this was real. He didn't read the contract. The thought pulsed relentlessly. Ryan hadn't read it, hadn't checked with legal, hadn't even asked his father before firing the one person holding Kingswell together. He had power, the title, the glass office, the family name on the lobby wall. But what he didn't have was knowledge. He didn't know the clients, the contracts, or the people holding this company up with tired hands and stubborn hearts. And that ignorance was his greatest weakness. For so long, I believed people in power deserved their seats, that their cold decisions came from some higher strategic understanding. But sitting there in the quiet half-light of my living room, I realized there was no secret room with smarter people. Just flawed humans, some driven by purpose, others by ego. The only difference was who believed they belonged. My phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Another voicemail icon blinking urgently. I didn't answer. I flipped open my laptop, staring at my reflection in the dark screen, older lined with exhaustion, but with something new. Burning behind my eyes resolve. They didn't care about Ryan. They cared about results. And I was the result. I set my phone to silent. Let them call. Let them panic. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one panicking. I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes, sunlight was glaring across the living room. My phone was vibrating non-stop on the table, flashing number after number, reception, accounting, legal. Each call was a silent confession they were panicking. The deal I'd spent 6 months building was teetering on collapse, all because Ryan wanted to prove he could swing an axe. I could almost see him pacing his glass office, barking orders to fix it. But there was no fix. Not without me. A bitter smile tugged at my lips. For 11 years, I answered every call immediately. Christmas morning's midnight contract. Crises even the day my mother died. I always showed up, always sacrificed. Today I let it ring. At 10:13 a.m., Ryan called. My finger hovered over accept, tempted to hear the panic in his voice. But I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, I listened as his voice came through, strained and thin. Lily, listen, there was a misunderstanding yesterday. I might have acted too fast. We need you back. Today. It's urgent. Please call me. Urgent! No apology, no remorse. Just panic, dressed in polite desperation. I poured a glass of water, drinking it slowly, letting each swallow ground me back into my body. Then I opened the Kingswell contract. Clause 17.2 stared back at me, bold and absolute. I was the sole negotiator. No one else could close it. For years I doubted myself. But this clause, this deal, their frantic desperation, it was proof. Proof that what I built mattered, that I wasn't disposable. I closed my laptop and stood by the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass as my phone buzzed again behind me. Today, for the first time in years, I wasn't chasing their approval. Today, they were chasing me, and I was finally ready to let them run. At 10:32 a.m., my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a name I hadn't seen in a while. Nicole, a former colleague, once part of my team before she transferred to marketing. We'd spent countless late nights side by side, polishing pitch decks and sharing vending machine pretzels for dinner. We hadn't talked in months, but seeing her name lit up on my screen sent a jolt through my chest. I answered immediately. Hey, Lily. She whispered, her voice barely audible over the faint hum of office chatter behind her. You won't believe what's happening here. I sank onto the couch, pressing my palm to my forehead. Try me. She took a quick breath. Ryan just got chewed out by his dad, like in front of everyone. A small smile ghosted across my lips. Tell me everything. He walked into the boardroom like he owned the place. Nicole continued, her words tumbling out fast and urgent. The Kingswell team was scheduled for a final signing call at 11. Right, Mr. Cole came in about 15 minutes ago, holding the printed contract in his hand. He didn't say a word at first, just slammed it down on the table so hard, half the pens rolled onto the floor. I could almost see it. The old man's quiet fury was legendary. He never raised his voice, never wasted words. But when he entered a room like that, people felt it in their bones. What did he say? I asked. He looked straight at Ryan and said, Did you read this before firing Lily? Nicole mimicked, dropping her voice to match Mr. Cole's gravelly baritone. Ryan tried to bluff, said something about moving in a new direction and reevaluating roles for organizational synergy. I let out a quiet, humorless laugh. Classic Ryan corporate buzzwords in place of competence. But Mr. Cole wasn't having it. Nicole continued, her voice breathless with adrenaline. He flipped right to the clause. You know your clause. The one that says you're the sole negotiator on Kingswell. Clause 17-2. My lifeline. My shield. Everyone knows why that clause exists. Nicole said, lowering her voice even further. Steel Ridge. The acquisition fiasco. Nobody forgot. I nodded silently, though she couldn't see me. Memories of that disaster still flickered behind my eyes. The panicked conference calls, the sleepless nights cleaning up the legal fallout. It was the worst 3 months of my career. But it was also the moment Mr. Cole saw what I was capable of. What happened next? I asked. Ryan turned pale, she whispered. Like ghost pale. You could see it hit him, Lily. He realized he'd just tanked the deal single-handedly. Mr. Cole told him right there in front of legal and finance and 3 department heads. If this deal falls through, your position here becomes negotiable. I felt a slow, controlled exhale slip from my lips. There it was, the first crack in Ryan's armor. And then I asked softly. Then Mr. Cole left the room. Ryan tried to keep the meeting going, but everyone was just silent. Nobody wants to touch Kingswell without you. He's been pacing the floor ever since. People are terrified. HR is scrambling. Legal's calling your phone nonstop. I glanced at the device still buzzing periodically, on silent beside me. I know. Nicole paused for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was gentler. What are you going to do? I didn't answer immediately. I watched a pigeon land on my balcony railing, tilting its iridescent head back and forth, as if assessing me. The city outside was alive with late morning light windows, glinting gold across skyscrapers like thousands of tiny suns. Finally, I spoke. I don't know yet. Whatever you decide, she said quietly, just know you have the upper hand now. I closed my eyes, feeling her words settle into the deepest parts of me. The part that had felt small and unseen for so long. The part that had bent under the weight of other people's ambitions, always folding myself down to fit their narrative. Not anymore. Thank you, Nicole, I said softly. We hung up, and for a moment the apartment was silent, except for the ticking of the old wall clock above the kitchen door. I rose, walked to the window, and pressed my fingertips against the glass, watching the endless flow of cars and buses and hurried pedestrians below. Ryan was scrambling. Mr. Cole was furious. The company was unmoored. And me. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one drowning. I was the tide. By noon, the calls had slowed. They came now in desperate bursts, legal reception, even HR, but each one ended the same way with my silent refusal. Then my phone buzzed with a name that made my pulse quicken. "Mr. Cole," I answered, holding my breath. "Lily," he said, voice rough with exhaustion and something deeper regret. "I'm sorry about what happened yesterday. I misjudged the situation. I misjudged him." I stayed silent, letting his words hang. "Please," he continued, "come in. Not just for the deal, but so we can talk privately." I stood at my window looking down at the restless city below. Part of me wanted to end the conversation to let them feel the weight of losing me a little longer. But another part, the part that understood leverage better than anyone, knew it was time to move. "I'll consider returning," I said calmly, but only under specific conditions. "Name them. I want a revised contract, full autonomy over Kingswell, written protection against termination without cause, and no interference from Ryan. Ever." There was a beat of silence, then "done." "And one more thing," I added, my voice hardening. "This can't happen again. Not to me. Not to anyone. You have my word." We ended the call. For a moment, I stood motionless, phone still pressed to my ear, feeling the cold satisfaction of being needed truly, irrefutably, needed settle into my bones. Then I moved. I changed out of my pajamas into my sharp navy suit, tied my hair back into a clean bun, and applied my lipstick with precise, deliberate strokes. When I caught my reflection in the mirror, I saw something new in my gaze. Not desperation, not fear, authority. When I arrived at the office just after noon, I didn't use the side entrance. I walked through the main lobby, head-high heels, clicking against marble floors. Conversations paused, eyes turned. The receptionist nearly knocked over her coffee, standing to greet me. "Miss Harris, Mr. Cole is expecting you. Thank you." As I walked down the hall, people shifted in their seats to watch. There was no smugness in me, only calm certainty. The quiet realization spreading through every room I passed. The woman they fired yesterday was the only one who could save them today, and I intended to make sure they never forgot it again. By 1:00 p.m., the boardroom was ready. The Kingswell team had just arrived, escorted in by 2 executive assistants, who fussed over bottled waters and branded leather folders, as if arranging offerings for royalty. Through the glass walls, I could see Mr. S., the CEO of Kingswell, standing at the far end of the table speaking quietly to his aides. He was a man known for his precision. For him, trust wasn't given. It was earned word by word, handshake by handshake, proven repeatedly, until it became unbreakable. I stood outside the room for a moment, scanning the documents in my folder one last time. Every detail was memorized, negotiated rates, phased delivery timelines, custom adaptation clauses. I'd spent half a year building this deal brick by brick, strategy by strategy, late night by late night. And today, it was mine to close. Through the glass, I caught sight of Ryan pacing along the corridor, his face tight with poorly concealed panic. He moved like a caged animal trapped in a decision he couldn't reverse. I inhaled deeply, feeling the quiet thrum of power settle into my chest, warm and steady. Then I stepped forward, heels echoing, with each deliberate strike against the marble floor. Conversations hushed, heads turned. The 2 assistants opened the boardroom doors without a word, stepping aside as I entered. It felt like walking into a throne room. The space fell silent for a beat as Mr. S. turned to face me. His sharp, hawkish eyes lit up the moment they found mine. I smiled, dipping my head in a greeting he'd taught me months ago. "Assalamu alaikum, Mr. S.," I said softly. His face broke into a rare smile, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Wa alaikumus salam, Lily." You remembered. "Respect goes a long way," I replied, switching back to English with ease. He gestured to the seat directly across from him. "Please, let us begin." I walked the length of the polished oak table, feeling every gaze follow me. As I sat down, I noticed Ryan outside watching through the glass, his face pale with rage and humiliation. Mr. Cole stood beside him, one hand raised sharply mid-conversation, silencing whatever protest Ryan was attempting. Their muffled voices escalated for a moment. Then Mr. Cole's jaw clenched, his hand dropping to his side. Ryan's face flushed crimson as he looked over his shoulder at me one last time before turning away and disappearing down the hall. That was the last time I saw him that day. I turned back to Mr. S, centering my focus fully on the man in front of me. The meeting began. Slide after slide, clause after clause, question after question, each one answered with crisp precision. My voice was calm, steady, unwavering, even as adrenaline pulsed under my skin like liquid lightning. At one point, Mr. S paused, looking me square in the eyes. "It is good you are here, Lily," he said softly. "Trust is fragile. You, however, are not." The words settled over me like a cloak of quiet armor. 2 hours later, as the clock struck 3:30 p.m., we stood and shook hands. The deal was signed. The Kingswell team filed out with polite nods, their CEO giving me a final approving smile before he disappeared down the corridor. I sat back down for a moment, exhaling the tension that had coiled through my body like steel wire. My hands trembled slightly in my lap, not from fear but from the weight of what had just been secured. Then I felt a presence behind me. I turned to see Mr. Cole standing in the doorway, shoulders relaxed for the first time in weeks. There was genuine relief on his face as he stepped inside. "You saved us," he said simply. I shook my head. "No. I saved myself. You just benefited." His lips twitched with something between a smile and a grimace. "Regardless, I owe you more than just an apology. You owe this company a leader," I replied calmly, rising to gather my files. "One who knows the difference between power and responsibility." He nodded slowly, the lines on his face deepening with weary understanding. "And one who knows when to listen." I slipped my documents into my leather tote, closed it with a clean snap, and met his eyes. Exactly. As I walked out of the boardroom, the entire floor seemed to still around me. Conversations hushed, eyes followed. But this time I felt none of the fear or smallness that had shadowed me for so many years. I walked with my head high, my steps unhurried, my breath steady. Because today I wasn't just an employee returning to her desk. I was the woman who saved the company. I was the negotiator they could never replace. I was the queen walking back into her kingdom. And I would never let them forget it. The Kingswell team filed out of the boardroom in a quiet wave of tailored suits and crisp leather briefcases. Mr. S lingered for a moment, his aides standing respectfully behind him as he adjusted his gold cufflinks. He turned to me, eyes gleaming with approval. "Lily," he said, his voice low, but carrying the authority of a man used to commanding rooms twice this size. "Today was flawless. Your preparation, your composure, your respect for our language. It speaks volumes." "Thank you," I replied softly, inclining my head. He smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his stern face. "Trust is everything in business. You have ours." With that, he extended his hand. I shook it firmly, feeling the warmth and quiet strength in his grip. Then he turned and strode out, his aides falling in step behind him, like a well-trained procession. The room fell silent. I sat back down for a moment, letting my eyes roam over the long oak table, the stacks of signed documents, the empty water glasses and scattered pens. For 6 months, this deal had been my world, my dawns and dusks, my 2 a.m., insomnia, my endless scribbled notes in the margins of legal drafts. Every line of it was burned into my mind like scripture. And now it was done, signed, sealed, secured. The Kingswell deal wasn't just a contract. It was a lifeline for the company, a multi-million-dollar anchor that would stabilize revenue streams for years to come, an entry into a lucrative Middle Eastern market that competitors had been trying and failing to penetrate for over a decade. I closed my eyes and let out a long, trembling breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle into my bones. The tension that had coiled through my shoulders for weeks began to loosen, replaced by something else entirely. Not relief, not triumph. Something deeper, something quieter. Validation. I heard the door open behind me. Footsteps. Then Mr. Cole's voice softer now, no longer carrying the forced authority of a CEO, but the weary sincerity of a man who had nearly lost everything. "You did it," he said quietly. I turned to look at him. He stood in the doorway, suit jacket, unbuttoned tie, slightly loosened gray hair, mussed like he'd run his hands through it one too many times that morning. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked old, human. "Yes," I replied calmly. "I did." He stepped into the room, his gaze sweeping over the signed contracts, spread neatly before me. "You didn't just save this deal," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved this company." I shook my head slightly. "I saved myself. The company just benefited." A smile flickered at the corners of his lips, weary but genuine. "Perhaps. But either way, we owe you a debt." I stood gathering the final documents into my leather folder. "What you owe me," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "is respect. For me, for the team, for every person who keeps this place running while people like Ryan pretend to lead." He nodded slowly, the truth of my words settling heavily between us. "And you'll have it." As I walked out of the boardroom, I felt the hush ripple through the open floor. Heads turned. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Eyes widened with a mixture of relief and awe. They all knew. They knew who had saved Kingswell, who had walked back in and closed the deal no one else could touch, who had faced down arrogance, disrespect, and sabotage, and emerged unbroken. At my desk, I set down my tote bag and slid into my chair. For a moment, I simply sat there, feeling the familiar worn leather cradle my shoulders, breathing in the faint scent of old coffee and whiteboard markers. My team gathered near the entrance, eyes wide with unspoken questions. I looked up at them and smiled. "It's done," I said softly. There was a beat of stunned silence. Then the room erupted in quiet cheers and sighs of relief. A few clapped. One of my analysts wiped away tears with the back of her hand. Another mouthed silently, "Thank you." I nodded once, curt and calm, then turned back to my screen. Emails were already flooding in, congratulations, contract, confirmation receipts, legal approvals, updated internal press releases. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I let them drop into motion, typing quickly, efficiently, confidently. Because the Kingswell deal wasn't just a triumph. It was proof. Proof that what I built mattered. Proof that my knowledge, my instincts, my resilience could not be replaced with arrogance and a last name. Proof that I was not just an employee sitting behind a glass door with her head down. I was the woman who had walked back in, head held high, and reminded every person in that building exactly who held the power. And I knew in that moment that I would never let them forget it again. The days after Kingswell felt strangely calm, almost too calm. The deal had made headlines in our industry newsletter by Tuesday morning. Breakthrough in cross-border negotiations, it read. Cole & Co. secures historic Middle Eastern partnership through tailored strategy and multilingual leadership. They didn't mention me by name, of course. These articles never did. But everyone in the company knew exactly who had sealed that deal. My inbox flooded with quiet congratulations, quick messages from juniors I'd mentored years ago, curt nods of respect from directors who once ignored me in meetings. Some wrote long, effusive notes about leadership under pressure. Others just sent a single line. "Thank you for showing us it's possible." I appreciated their words, but I wasn't naive. Because in corporate environments, the wind shifts fast. One day you're the hero. The next, a forgotten name on an outdated org chart. Still, for a brief moment, there was lightness. People laughed again in the break room. The interns stopped walking on eggshells. Even finance cracked jokes in Monday's budget sync. But beneath that temporary warmth, I felt it. Something was off. It started small, almost invisible, like hairline fractures running through marble. First, my travel expense reimbursement for the Kingswell final meeting was delayed without explanation. Then documents I submitted for approval came back, unsigned, flagged for minor errors that weren't actually there. IT flagged an email I had sent to an overseas partner containing incorrect pricing data. Luckily, that partner trusted me enough to call directly for clarification. But the damage was done. Doubt had been planted. I reported it to our internal systems team. They ran a security sweep and came back with an answer that sent a cold chill down my spine. "There's no sign of external hacking," the tech lead told me, his voice tight with discomfort. The message originated from inside the building. That evening, I sat alone in my office, staring at the blinking cursor in an empty email draft, feeling the air around me grow dense and suffocating. Ryan. He wasn't finished with me. Firing me hadn't worked, so now he'd chosen a different strategy. The oldest corporate sabotage tactic in the book. Make her look incompetent, slowly, subtly. Undermine trust, erode credibility. And when the final blow comes, no one questions it. Because incompetent people don't get to keep their jobs. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling tiles above me. Their uniform grid felt like a cage, each fluorescent panel flickering slightly in the hum of the air conditioning. I'd seen this before. At my first job out of college, my director used the same tactics on a brilliant senior manager. He didn't confront her directly. He cut off her resources, reassigned her projects without notice, quietly rewrote her reports before forwarding them to the board, inserting errors she never made. Within 3 months, her reputation was ruined. She left quietly one Friday evening, and no one ever spoke her name again. I was 22 then, too young, and terrified to understand what I was witnessing. But I wasn't 22 anymore. I wasn't going to disappear. That night, I began documenting everything. Every email delay, every missing approval, every unexplained change in document metadata. I opened a private notebook logging dates, times, exact wordings, who was in the room, who was CC'd. I knew paper trails were more powerful than emotions in corporate warfare. And this was war, whether Ryan realized it or not. Days passed, then a week, then 2. One afternoon, I was walking past conference room B on my way back from the break room when I heard his voice. Ryan. It was too loud for a private discussion, sharp and dismissive, tinged with manufactured concern. "She's unstable," he was saying. "Since she came back, she's been erratic, aggressive. I don't think she's fit to manage high-pressure clients anymore." I froze outside the half-closed door. Another voice responded, hesitant. Someone new. A junior executive, maybe. But the Kingswell deal, she pulled that off under serious pressure. "She got lucky," Ryan snapped. "We can't run a company on luck." "I'm just saying, maybe it's time we start thinking about succession planning for client services." "She's clearly overextended." The blood in my veins turned to ice. Not from fear, but from the familiar cold clarity of betrayal. He was planting seeds, poisoning the well, creating a narrative so that when he made his move, No one would be surprised. People would nod quietly, whispering, "Yeah, we saw it coming." She was slipping. I stood there for a moment longer, then walked away without a sound. My heels were silent against the carpeted corridor, but inside every step thundered with rage I refused to show. That evening I stayed late in the office. The halls were empty and dim, only the cleaning staff's quiet movements echoing from far down the hall. I sat alone in the glass meeting room staring out at the dark city skyline pricked with lights. I wondered how many more battles I would have to fight just to keep doing my job, just to remain visible, just to hold on to the dignity I had spent a lifetime building. And for the first time in years, I let silent tears slide down my cheeks, hot and unrelenting. Not because I was weak, but because I knew I wasn't done fighting, and neither was he. The boardroom felt colder than usual that morning. Mr. Cole stood by the window staring out at the skyline, like a general awaiting his final battle. The auditors sat at the far end of the table, files, open screens glowing with damning evidence. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on my shoulders, and yet, under it all, I felt steady. Ryan walked in late suit, perfect smile, rehearsed. His eyes flicked over me with annoyance, then shifted to the auditors. "She's not on the audit committee," he said flatly. Mr. Cole didn't turn. "She's here at my request." Ryan scoffed. "This is supposed to be internal, confidential." "Then you should have kept it that way," I said calmly when you used company resources to fabricate emails. He rolled his eyes. "That's ridiculous." David, the lead auditor, cleared his throat. "We've traced multiple login attempts tied to your assistant's account, all connected to document alterations targeting Lily's work. There's a clear timeline." Ryan's confident smile twitched. "You're reaching. She's just bitter about being let go." I met his gaze unwavering. "You didn't let me go, Ryan. You sabotaged me. And you almost tanked the biggest deal this company has landed in 5 years." Mr. Cole turned slowly, his eyes dark with disappointment and fury. "I gave you a chance," he said quietly. "I gave you more than one. And you've done nothing but tear down the people trying to build something real here." Ryan's voice cracked with desperation. "This isn't what you think." No, Mr. Cole cut him off sharply. "It's worse." Silence pressed down on the room like a physical force. Ryan's eyes darted from face to face, finding no allies. "The board will review this report." Mr. Cole continued, his voice low and final. "Until then, you are suspended, effective immediately." Ryan's mouth opened, but no words came out. His gaze met mine one last time, and in that fleeting moment, I saw it, the hollow realization that his power had dissolved. Then he turned and walked out in silence. The door closed behind him with a soft click that felt like thunder. Mr. Cole exhaled, sinking into his chair, rubbing his temples with trembling hands. "I failed him," he whispered, "as a leader and maybe as a father." "You can't lead someone who refuses to grow," I said quietly. "But you can still lead this company." He lifted his gaze to meet mine, eyes bloodshot with exhaustion and regret. Then he reached into his leather folder and slid a document across the table to me. Inside was a promotion letter. Director of Client Strategy, executive level, reporting directly to him. I looked up, stunned. "I didn't ask for this." "I know," he said softly. "That's why you deserve it." I hesitated, the weight of everything pressing into my chest. The sabotage, the humiliation, the endless nights spent holding this company together with nothing but caffeine and grit. Then I spoke, voice steady. "If I accept this, I want a say in how we move forward. I don't want to just hold a title. I want to rebuild this culture the right way." A slow smile tugged at the corners of his lips. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Later that evening, I sat alone in my new office, temporary for now, while renovations were underway. The sun was setting beyond the skyline, washing the glass towers in molten gold. I stared at the blank nameplate on the door. For years I had walked these halls wondering if anyone really saw me. Wondering if all the late nights, the salvage deals, the silent sacrifices meant anything. I thought staying quiet was the best way to keep peace, to avoid friction, to protect myself. But silence had almost cost me everything. It wasn't just about Kingswell, or Ryan, or this promotion. It was about remembering that competence is not arrogance, professionalism is not weakness, and loyalty only matters if it goes both ways. I had been underestimated, sabotaged, humiliated, but I had never been defeated, and I had never let myself become bitter in the process. That to me was the real win. In the weeks that followed, I started reshaping my department, reopening communication lines, reinstating people who had been pushed out unfairly. I set up an anonymous reporting system so no one else had to fear retaliation for speaking up. I met with younger employees who quietly asked how I stayed strong through it all. I told them the truth. You don't always get to pick the battles, I said, but you do get to decide who you become in the middle of them. As for Ryan, last I heard he was interviewing at smaller firms out of state. Some said Mr. Cole pulled strings to keep his name out of public scandal. Maybe that was a final act of fatherly love. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. One afternoon, walking past the boardroom where I closed Kingswell, I paused. The glass walls gleamed in the late sun, empty now, quiet and still. I remembered it all, the sabotage, the desperation, the triumph. But the real turning point wasn't the signature on that contract. It was the moment I walked out of Ryan's office, calm and unbroken, refusing to beg for what I had already earned. That was the moment I took my power back, and I knew I would never, ever let them take it from me again. Quiet and still,